Welcome. I'm Kalei. I'm a member of the Yakima Nation, which is located south side of Washington State. I'm the Community Relations Director for the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute, and it's really wonderful to see you today. You came in from the sunshine, which we're sacrificing that quality vitamin D time to come in and have a conversation. Would like to just thank you for joining us on the University of Washington campus, and also acknowledge that we are on Amish land, and that our Amish relatives and ancestors are here with us today, and just really happy that we're able to hold this space for the conversation that we will have with Dr. Valli, Kanuha. Anyway, she is a professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Her professional and research interests are on violence against women of color, specifically Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, Asian, and LGBTQ communities. Also child abuse and family violence, and alternative justice interventions for interpersonal and community violence. She was born and raised in Hilo, Hawaii, and the current research focuses on Native Hawaiian culture, beliefs, values, and traditions to address domestic, sexual, and family violence in Hawaiian and Polynesian communities. These conversations don't always happen both in communities and in academic institutions. And I just am really honored to be able to introduce you today and to help you hold the space of honest conversation and move towards healing, love, and coming back to our original expressions. So please join us. Welcome.
Aloha, everyone. You know, the way we usually start gatherings like this is to do some kind of blessing or a prayer. And so what I wanted to share with everyone, and actually I usually have all of us do this together, but just kind of didn't get around to the prep topic. But also because whenever we gather together to learn, we come together to pool our energy, to our resources, and our best heart and hearts and minds to sometimes be pushed beyond the places that we get. You usually cup your hands, and it's a two like this. And what happens is usually when I do the chant, and you do this at the end, everybody starts clapping. Don't clap. Okay, don't clap. Just do the same thing as me. And so you want to try that? So just put your hands either like in a cup like this, or you can do like this too. And it's just two times like this. Go ahead. Perfect. And the idea of this is just to quietly to signal to our ancestors and to ourselves that that's the end of that particular chant. Okay? Thanks. It's great now that I have an excuse to take my shoes off. E ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e o na mea huna noea o na mele e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e o na mea huna noea o na mele e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e o na mea huna noea o na mele e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai Thanks. Okay, so I'm just so thrilled and honored to be here today to share some of my work and to talk with all of you about some of the shared interests that we have. I want to start with, okay, so I want to start with how we usually start our gatherings in Hawaii, which actually was supposed to be our honoring, but I'm just going to do this one anyway. And it's what we call a Little Noel. And how many people have been to Hawaii? Okay, well, that's it. Let's go ahead. Let's go eat.
All right.
So for those of you who have been to Hawaii, some of this person encountered with a bird in the forest, right? But there's knowledge to be gained and wisdom to be gained all over and all around us. And our job is to be open to those knowledges that will come to us. That's what we're hoping to do today. I also wanted to say that throughout my presentation, I'll be using images from Teacher Perez, who is an artist in Hawaii living in the volcano area, and he specializes in wood block prints of ancient Hawaii. And the reason that I try to acknowledge Teacher Perez is because, you know, one of the things that happens when we encounter and interact a lot of times, particularly in the Western world, but also in our fast-paced world, is that we forget to give credit to those who have come before us, to those whose work we rely on, to those whose work we appropriate, not necessarily in a bad way, but because so many of us, especially Native and Indigenous people, so many of us have had things taken away from us and then appropriated by other cultures, that I feel that it's an important obligation and responsibility to always give credit to those who have come before us and have taught us the things that we know and are part of who we are. Okay, this thing is talking to me and doing all kinds of fun things on this laptop. Slideshow help. I'm like over there, but it won't go off. And I can't really see this thing. So the next thing I want to do is to honor and to give gratitude. And thank you very much. First of all, of course, to the original peoples of these lands, the Squamish, Snoqualmie, Tulalip, Riala, and Mogoshute in this area. And remembering always, right, that, and it's something I'm going to come to later on in my talk, this idea of owning land. And, you know, we're only stewards of land, we're only stewards of space. And the concept of owning something that is part of nature is I'm not sure that it's natural, but I'm also not sure that it's right. And so when we remember that we walk as guests, each and every one of us, except in places where our ancestors come from, then, you know, it gives us a different sense of accountability and responsibility to every single place that we are, right? And so I honor all the people who came before us and allow us to be on this land today. I also wanted to give a shout out and a thank you to Na'ilahi, the Northwest Network, and IRIC, the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute, for hosting my visit here today. I don't think so many people know, but I am a proud graduate of the School of Social Work. I got my PhD here in School of Social Work in '97, and I was really honored to have as my chair Eddie Uehara, who's gone on to bigger, brighter, and better things. I hold very dearly UW and the Seattle area in my heart for the learning that I was allowed to have here. So this is the first time I'm back in 18 years since I graduated, and I'm so honored to be here. I also want to honor all of our families, but particularly my family and my ancestors, my spiritual guides, all of whom have allowed me to be here to share, to be with all of you today. And this notion of always acknowledging our past, our present, and our future. And again, for those of you who are students, and hopefully we're all lifelong students, right? I always think, like, when I've learned everything I need to learn, I hope I'm dead, because why go on? So hopefully every day we're thinking about what it is that we're here to learn, what challenges and what journeys are here before us. And one of the ways that we as Hawaiians, but many peoples, situate ourselves is always to remember that wherever you stand in your heart, your mind, in this space, there's a past, present, and a future that's attached to you, to your surroundings, the ecology of where you are. And, you know, it's a different way of being, right? The same way if you think that you are just guests in most of the places where you're walking and being and interacting and having your Starbucks, that you have a different sense of reality. And the idea of past, present, future, which we're going to revisit again in my talking about our project, is that you understand that the implications of your behavior actually probably predated you by centuries, if not eons. And the implications of your behavior in the future will also be felt by what you do today. And so again, this notion of our accountability, our responsibility, and why we call it kuleana. And the word kuleana is responsibility, but the root word is kuleana. Ana means something that goes on forever. So a lot of people use this word, oh, kuleana. It's my kuleana to clean up after I finish eating. But it's way more than that. It's that I shall clean up when I finish eating every single place that I am. So this idea of responsibility and accountability goes on forever. And when we think about that everywhere that we're situated, we're embedded in those multiple dimensions in time and space. I think again helps us to be cognizant of who we are and really how unimportant we are in the cosmos of time and space, right? But also what a great honor we have to take care of all that is around us, to take care and honor everything that came before us, and to always think that for all the generations to come that none of us will know in this bodily form will be dependent on what we do today. And so past, present, and future is really important, I think, for all of us to remember. And I want to particularly highlight three of our elders who helped with this project that I've been talking about today. Auntie Lou Garden on the left, Auntie Malia Craver, and Couple David Kanuha, who are three Native Hawaiian elders who really, I feel, helped me to find out my own way home and my own way back to my culture and my own way of melding my Western feminist teachings and experience with very, very old teachings and experiences of our Native Hawaiian culture. So this is kind of what I'm going to talk about today, a little bit of background about this project that I've been working on, Namili Okono, which is a Hawaiian cultural domestic and sexual violence intervention for Hawaiian and Polynesian men who have offended their partners and families, and for women who are survivors of violence. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the values and principles that underlie the approach of this intervention, show you some of the images and hear a little bit from our participants who have been part of this journey. And throughout, I'm going to be peppering throughout reflections of an Indigenous insider researcher, and that's me. And you know, I think what's especially important for all of us who either engage in research, want to engage in research, have been researched, or have friends, neighbors, or relatives who have been part of research projects, either as an informant or as an investigator. You know, there are many tensions in the research endeavor that I think are not often covered as well as they should in research methods courses, or even if you're working as a research associate or a PI in a project. There are a lot of assumptions that we have about what research is. I would say, for the most part, made traditional from a Western gaze. And so part of what I try to do is to problematize, which is to make trouble about this research endeavor. And a lot of it comes from my own experience of doing research with my own people and my own identity groups. And so almost all of my research over the last almost 20 years has been with my own identity groups. So I do research with women. I do research with Hawaiian men. I do research in queer communities. I do research in small towns. I do research in urban areas. Most of my research is qualitative, but I do multi-methods. partnership with other people. And so there's so many tensions in this, doing research with your own people. And that's been pretty much the focus of my interests around research for the last 15 plus years, is to try to figure out how shall we understand who we are as researchers, as we're also members of the community that we are researching, and walking what Michelle Fine calls the margins and the hyphens, right? So I'll start with this one quote from Thomas and Francis. Ethnography is not simply a collection of these I and other. It is reflective of our own lives and cultural practices. So, that's with the Hippocratic oath that says, to physicians, doctors do no harm. I always say to my students, researchers do no harm. Because there's a lot of work that we do in the exploratory investigative process that I would say, for the most part, it's inadvertent. But that doesn't excuse us, right? But we harm people sometimes in the process of trying to gain knowledge and to understand things. And so this idea of knowing yourself as a researcher, as you engage in research, to me, is the number one thing we should be doing. And I would say this is the number one thing that's never taught in research classes, which is, who are you? How do you situate yourself in every single research endeavor? I think to me, we should spend a whole semester on that, or a whole quarter on that, because there's nothing you can do with the skills, knowledge that you have as a researcher that will not be defeated with a lack of understanding and self-reflective skills in yourself, right? And so, to me, the job of research is an ethical one at its core all the time, right? And so, if you don't know who you are as a researcher and you're doing this kind of work, I think you're missing something in your own edification and really your own knowledge set. So, this is talking about ethnography, but I think it applies to probably every research project. So I'm going to share with you this intervention research that I've been doing for many years. And it was started actually, a long time ago, 2000 to 2008, which is, we have got a grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to design, pilot test, and evaluate a culturally based intervention for domestic violence. And as is traditional for our people and many peoples, we were gifted the name Kanuha, which means in Hawaiian, the pathway to harmony, by Auntie Maria Craver, who's one of our really blessed elders. And so it was developed in, people know Hawaii, on the island of Hawaii, and the reason, again, I'll just say kind of from my own ethics as a researcher, the University of Hawaii, where the campus that I'm at, which is the main campus of the university, is in Honolulu. People say, is that the big island? And I said, no, it's the main island, but it's not the big island. And the biggest island is down in Hawaii, which is the easternmost and southernmost island in the Hawaiian island chain that's occupied. And so I'm from the island of Hawaii, and so I purposely decided that I would bring something like this to the place that I grew up in. So now you see already that the hyphens of insider outsider began because I made a concerted, deliberate decision to apply for money that would bring almost $2 million to my own hometown to pilot test something that had never been done in Hawaii and probably not anywhere else in the method to be used. So my politic in doing that was that because I live in Honolulu, which is the urban center of Hawaii, everything goes there. All the money goes there, all the research money goes there, all the services go there, all the quote-unquote innovations go there, all the replications go there, and not much goes to the outer islands and the rural areas. And so this decision, in a way, to go back home to to where I grew up as a child, and to bring an intervention like this that none of us had any idea of. First of all, we didn't know exactly what we were doing. So we were like starting from scratch to build something from scratch that had never been done before. And so we went to Hawaii Island. I took about 3 years to just see this thing. So again, I know there's some CDPR students here, but for those of you who do communities research, part of what I did in making a conscious decision to bring something to bear in my community of my birth, as well as to really mobilize some of the traditional and culturally traditional resources of our community. I spent over 3 years before we wrote the grant. So I went back to my hometown and I talked to people. There was one domestic violence program on the entire island of Valli at that time. And I said, is there anybody interested in like using culture to like do something about domestic violence? Has anybody done that before? And so I brought all, so then they said, well, there's this one agency, so I went to talk with them. I didn't know any of them. And I said, I'm really interested in this. I've just come back from Utah and went to school, but it's something I really want to do. And so, I was doing this whole thing. It's not thing, so anyway, so I went on the board of the agency. Those hyphens again, I went on the board of this agency. I got to know all the staff, I got to know the board members, I helped to change the name of the agency. And then we worked together and we said, okay, are we ready? Yeah, so we looked for money, we applied, and we got it. And so that began in 2000. So this project was seeded at least 3 years before with what I call preparing the ground for planting. So it's just really kneading the ground, meeting people, talking to people, what were people interested in doing, what were some of the concerns people had, and then we went ahead and they were all surprised about the money we did. So that project went off about 7 years and ran out of money, and actually there were many problems. So it was an intervention research project. So we designed a project, then we pilot tested it, and then we evaluated it. And in the entire project, I played every single role. So first of all, I was the PI. I wrote the grant. However, I helped write the curriculum. I trained the staff. I fired the first executive director. I had all these different roles that I played, and I also participated. I trained all my graduate students who worked on this project. All of us participated in the intervention, so that we know exactly what it is that we're working on and working toward. And then I interacted and delivered actually some of the lessons as part of the intervention. So these multiple roles that I played. As a small town girl returning home from her PhD and bringing resources to bear to bring the best of the resources of our community forward, was filled with tension. And these are some of the tensions that I think are missing in our dialogue and our learning about what it means to be a researcher, right? It's not that clean and pure as Campbell Stanley would have you believe. It's just not like that, right? I mean, it's very, very messy. And in some ways, working those hyphens makes it way more messy. And so we did Kalei, and then in 2008, we expanded the model and brought it to Oahu, to Kanuha. So the name then changed to another Kokono, and this name was given by Kalei, who was our elder. The Kalei, we took 2 years to actually design the curriculum. And another Kokono for Oahu, which was a derivation of Kalei, took about 2 years also, meaning every week our elder, myself, and 2 other people to design and to adapt the curriculum. So another Kokono I just want to share with you is the name of it is working in a culturally right manner to plant the seeds that will guide our men to do what is right culturally and spiritually while supporting the spiritual healing of our women. And so there's a long story to that, but that's the name that was given to us, and we were very, very honored to have that. So let me tell you a little bit about the guiding principles that evolved as part of our work. So the first thing was to elevate Native Hawaiians and Indigenous approaches as valuable. So the idea that we're not all drunks, we're not all druggies, we're not all people who can't go to school. We're not that way. So I think for many of our peoples, especially for Indigenous Native peoples, that what colonization and racism has done is kind of portrayed us as people who are not capable, when actually we're doing very well, thank you, before anybody else got to where we were. But the fact is, we have become colonized ourselves, and become in many ways our own worst colonizers in our own minds and hearts, and those of others in our community. So the idea was that, you know, we know a few things. We don't need to order a curriculum from Nebraska. We can figure out how to do something that's very not only innovative, but evidence-based and culturally sound. The other idea was that while the intervention was based at an individual level, group intervention with women who were survivors of violence, but also men who were court-ordered for domestic violence offenses, we were always thinking, what about at the community level? What about at the systemic level? And then the other thing about this intervention, for those of you who know, that the mainstream interventions for domestic and sexual violence, I would say for the last 40 years, which is how long I've been doing this work, is basically at the individual level, the micro level, right? We're going to fix the batterers and make them not be abusive anymore. We're going to do treatment for sex offenders so they don't offend anymore. We're going to put them on the sex registry so that we can catch them and watch where they're going. I mean, all of this is at this individual level. Track, monitor, surveil people who are not behaving correctly. But we're also going to do the same thing with survivors and their children. So this idea of focusing more on individuals was something that we said we would elevate our outcomes to the idea, and that actually, and this is literally the talk I would give to Native Hawaiian men and Polynesian men who would come into the groups, because I delivered some of the groups. I would say, you know, in 6 months, when you leave our program and you're finished, I hope that you never hurt your partner or your children ever again, or a future partner or future children in your life again. But what will be more important to me is that you go out into the world and that you are a good man, and that you don't litter, that you don't use drugs, that you don't drink and drive, that you're kind to people. And so this is, believe it or not, very antithetical to most interventions for any kind of offender, because all we're focused on is changing the behavior, not the soul and the heart of the person. And so what we focused on at a community level is, we don't want you to come back to a program like this. We want you to promote wellness and healing and goodness and correct behavior among all the boys and men that you know. And this was something that really kind of came to us through our elders, because for those of them who didn't know anything about domestic violence, the whole thing was, that's all you're going to do is to make them stop being abusive? Shouldn't we make them be good men and contribute in our community? And we said, you know what, good idea. So the other, some of the other guiding principles, that we would say the C word, colonization, and the R word, racism. And that we would say the colonization and racism, this is my belief and my standpoint, the colonization and racism has contributed to the nature, the level, the extent, and the frequency of family and intimate violence in our communities now. And what I also said, though, is colonization is an explanation, not a rationalization. And believe it or not, for many of these men who have been doing this for many, 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 many years, 3, 4, 5 relationships, not one of them tried to pull the colonization, blaming the white guy rationale. Because what we said is, understanding colonization is to understand what's happened to you, and how it is that you've gotten to this place in your life, that you would lift a hand to your partner, that you would call her such degrading names, and that you would disregard what this means to your children to see you behaving in this way. And we would say, as a people, we didn't used to act like this, right? And my belief is, no people act like this, because if they did, they probably would be dead now, right? Every single culture has constraints on this kind of behavior, and some have more or less than others. So we basically said, we're going to talk about colonization, we're going to own colonization, and we're going to change. We're going to decolonize our minds and hearts so that we can carry on the way that we're supposed to, as good, as productive, and as resilient peoples. The second, another guiding principle is the idea of trauma, right? And so trauma-informed care, trauma is like a big old word now, but it's like, this is so old. And that's why I said my talk is Back to the Future. I mean, we used to talk about trauma like in the 60s, okay? So why everybody thinks this is all a big old discovery now, it's like, most of us kind of laugh, and you know us laughing, and those of us who've done this work a long time, it's like, really? trauma-informed care is like such a miracle in discovery. But this idea of really talking about trauma as related to colonization has also been part of it. So trauma, as we kind of imagine it and discuss it in this time, in this contemporary time, are the things that we know, right? War, natural disasters, domestic violence, death of parents, right? And so, what we also, I don't think I've seen any study of this colonization as a trauma when we think about trauma-informed care. But what we believe is trauma, that colonization is a form of trauma. And so when we think about cultural historical trauma, it includes a lot of things, but it definitely includes colonization. So we think about trauma as a central theme that's related to victimization, related to family violence, it's related to drugs, it's related to poverty, it's related to colonization and racism and all forms of oppression. And then because I am a researcher, and because I was trained in the West, I really feel that this idea of really looking at what we're calling evidence or best practice or practice-based evidence, or whatever you want to call it, but however it is that people define what evidence is, that we would think about that, we would consider it, we would integrate it, we would intersect it with what we believe are the best of our own traditions. And so once again, see this walking on this hyphen as a Western-trained academic researcher with my elders and people who have way deeper knowledge about some things that I don't have, but that are deep knowledges and are deep forms of understanding evidence and truths, right? So we decided we're going to always keep conscious what we've learned from 30 years of domestic and sexual violence research and intervention with thousands of years, if not millions of years, of being Native people. And so our project approach, which I think is significant for the way we think about all of our interventions, right? So another big topic, it's been a big topic for about maybe 15 plus years, is this idea of replicability, right? Can it be replicated? Can it be transferred? So transferability, replicability, all this kind of thing about basically the government is not going to pay for something that somebody else can't do. That's really what it is, right? So the government is saying we're not going to put millions of dollars into some kind of intervention if nobody else in the world can use it. And so this idea of generalizability and replicability, I think, is a valid thing for us to be concerned about. However, from a cultural approach, and definitely from an indigenous cultural approach, what we basically said, and it's kind of like, I don't know that I knew this, but as we started doing the work, I realized that it's something deep inside me anyway. I never liked the manualized thing. Where you pay your $300 and you get a manual from Omaha, Nebraska, and then you try to do it in your community, and nobody likes it, and the wording is all funky and stuff like that. But then I realized when we did this actually in vivo, a real practice, that there's some things that are not transferable, but more importantly, it should not be. It should not be transferable, right? That the sacred nature and the unique nature of a particular intervention might be best served just for a point in time with a particular place, with a particular group of people. And I think any of us who have experienced something that was just life-changing, right? I mean, you're having those kind of life-changing things, like marry the person you think you're going to marry, or go back to school, or whatever, right? You can't exactly replicate that moment when that happened. And in a way, something that's so life-changing as we hope this would be, can't exactly be replicated in other places either. So this appreciation that there are specific histories of peoples and sites and stories that are associated with wherever you're going to do a thing, especially a social intervention, that needs to be accounted for. And sometimes, I know this might sound kind of wacky, but sometimes I think, when we have all our ducks in a row, we have a great research design, and the thing just kind of doesn't work, it might have nothing to do with the design. It might have to do with something old in the land. It might have to do with some story or something that happened on that place where you're doing your youth violence prevention program or your diabetes education program. There might be something else that's so unknowable to us that's getting in the way of our perfect research design, right? So I think appreciating more those things that are unseen to us as we think about ourselves as researchers is part of the lesson that we learned in this one. The other idea is the idea of metaphors. And again, in academia, metaphors, I kind of don't go over that well. Because we want there to be concrete knowledge, measurable knowledge, learning objectives, and then we grade you, based on whether or not you met those. And part of what we learned is that we do this a long time doing this work, anti-violence work, but I think we didn't know how to implement it. And that is, if you say to somebody, why don't you just leave that guy? Right? And we say to somebody, why were you dressed that way when you went out to that bar? Why did you have that fourth drink? I mean, you must have known it was going to lead you down some not a good path, right? Or you say, so whatever it is that we're saying to people in this direct form, surprisingly, guess what? We don't do the thing we ask them to do, right? Because when we ask those kinds of questions, it doesn't come from a place of love and care and safety and protection, or even of accountability, right? So when we would do this group with the men, we would say, okay, we want you to tell us every single thing you did that got you arrested, and now you're in this group. And the guys would be so mad, right? Like, I don't know why I'm here, my wife called the cops on me. That's all they would say. So this idea of using metaphors, this way of kind of coming to people in a more natural way of communicating, was something that we used as a teaching tool that was actually very powerful. This is a longer story, but for the last, I would say, 50 years, the United States has been trapped, I would say, in a very retributive and punishing state of being. And I think our buildup of the prison nation, our buildup of incarceration and carceral states. See, I didn't touch it. Why is that? What am I supposed to do now? And what it's done is a lot of our social interventions, again, whether or not we intended, a lot of our social interventions are punitive. They really are. And so part of what we decided to do is to say that we would focus on hope-giving, a belief in the ultimate human capacity to change, our basic human nature to be good, our basic trust that a lot of behavior that's dysfunctional can be changed. I would say there's like maybe 400 people in the United States that we probably can't help, but all the other tens of millions of people we can help. Or let's put it this way, I don't know how to help these 400 people. But the majority of people, I believe, can change. So I am a behaviorist, and I believe in learning theory. So that's part of what this focused on. But I think the other more important part of this is that we have to come from a place of aloha, of regard, of respect, of integrity, if we want people to give that back to us. And if we want people to be in their lives with their partners and their children and their neighbors in a way that upholds the best of who they are to be, then we have to be that too. And that's, again, researcher, facilitator, violence prevention educator, diabetes teacher, know yourself. And if any place in you has this judgment of people's behavior that you think should be different than it is, you probably are not being the best model for how people can heal themselves. Because we all have problems. We all have problems, and no one of us is better than anybody else. And unless we extend that love and hope to people, I don't see how we can expect that people can change. And even that extending of love and hope, that's not even the stages of change. We should have a stage and stages of change model that says the provider has to be in a place, it has to be in that simultaneous place, but probably a step ahead in terms of their regard for themselves and those that they're working with. And then the other thing about the approach that was quite unique is we use the exact same intervention for survivors, victims, and also for those who have hurt them, the offenders or the abusers. But we focused the approach on empowerment for the women and accountability for the men. And I would say there's probably no intervention that I've heard of anywhere in the country that does domestic violence and sexual violence intervention with victims and offenders that uses the exact same curriculum. And that tells us something right there, right? We've been doing this for 40 years, and we always do this different things for people who are having problems in their families. And then we're kind of surprised that when we launch them off, like they just can't get themselves together. So this was something that was also unique in the approach. So I just wanted to share now some of the core values. And we have many core values, but this is again kind of a way to kind of think about for all of you as you're thinking about social interventions, right? And I met this morning with Northwest Network. I don't know how many people know that great, wonderful program. And you know, they're trying to figure out some new interventions. And I said, you know, the most important thing for you is to really focus on what your values and principles are. And once that's figured out, then you'll know how you're supposed to do the thing, right? But I think in a lot of our social interventions, we go right to what we're going to do and not what we believe. And then it defeats itself, right? So something that we're doing in intervention kind of doesn't work, but it's because we didn't start with what do we value, what's important, what are our hopes and dreams, what do we consider our integrity, right? So when we don't have these values and principles outlined before we start a social intervention, then things kind of go amok, right? So it might go amok anyway, but at least then you know why it will, if you've had the principle discussion to begin with, yeah. So here's some of the values. This is the idea of the interconnectedness, right? So we say everything you do, systems theory, everything you do has a ripple effect on others, right? Bokahi, this idea of harmony and balance. Pono, this idea of the basic goodness and truthfulness. You know, I think in many of our communities we say to walk the good path, to walk the path of goodness and righteousness, which means that you treat all people as you would treat yourself. I mean, you treat you as you want people to treat you. Ike ho'ai, which is identity. So if we think colonization has robbed us of who we are, then our intervention is to bring an identity back to you. And then the other one that I think is just really great and just so important is this idea of the instinct. So one of the things that one of my elders said is, and he has a PhD, he has an MDiv, and he's a Hawaiian cultural practitioner. He says, I do my best thinking between my hips and my shoulders. Once I start thinking above my shoulders, I'm in trouble. So this idea of really trusting our heart, our gut, our instinct, and especially in domestic violence, I think for those of you who know the dynamics, right, the one thing that victims always say is, I had kind of a funny feeling about that, but I didn't trust it. I kind of didn't like what my partner was saying, but I just said, oh, it's just me. That's your instinct talking, right? So we say to people, and what do I say to abusers? I say, if you had followed your instinct, what do you think would have happened? You know what they all say? I wouldn't be in this group. Because they know what they did was wrong. They do. But when you approach it that way, instead of, if you hadn't done this, you would have gotten arrested. But if you say, if you had followed your instinct, what would have happened? They say, I wouldn't have done what was wrong. So here's one of my little tidbits for you. So this is one of our elders to me, the Native feminist researcher. I said, now, Auntie, can you tell us, I'm going to do our intervention, we want to know about equality. She said, there's no such word in the Hawaiian language for equality because there's no such concept in our culture. It's not equality, it's balance, right? So now, as a long-time feminist, I don't use the word equality anymore. I talk about balance, harmony, complementarities, reciprocation. Because I think equality is, I think that's a Western term. At first, I don't think it's real anyway. So I think equality doesn't really make sense for our everyday lives. Balance, reciprocity, those are the things I think are important. Okay, so we don't have so much time. I want to make sure we have a little time for some questions. Although we started a little late, but I'll try to go fast. So the group was 4 to 6 months, 4 months for the women, 6 months for the men. Weekly sessions, 2 hours. visited cultural sites. Everyone carved, I'm going to show you some pictures, carved a bamboo stand and stamped a sacred cake for closing ceremony. And the men had to come up with a non-violence plan. All the groups were co-facilitated. Sometimes two women, sometimes men and women. Never two men, it was always men and women. And here's another quote from Tomaselli. We should not be embarrassed, ashamed, or tentative of what we're doing. Neither should we allow ourselves to be intimidated by our conventional scientific peers and canonical adherents who may be unsettled by conventional methods. And so again, this hyphen, and you see here, this is me with 3 of the staff, learning some of the lessons that we're about to teach the men and women in the group. So here's just a list of some of the topics, and again, I'm happy to talk to people afterwards about how we taught on these topics. But again, for the most part, people in this intervention had not learned a lot about their own cultures and histories. And what we tried to do is to situate the relearning of learning for the first time, our cultural practices, as a way to understand that this is not who we were as people. We honored women. We did not abuse them. Women had status. They were not below the men. That our primary responsibility as adults is to care for children. And that means every adult for every child, right? So every adult generation is called Kanuha, that's parent. So it doesn't matter if you're a parent or not. If you're an adult generation, you're a parent of every child. And you're responsible for every child, right? If you're an elder, you're responsible for all the adults and children who are in the adult and children generation. So these are some of the things that we taught, yeah? And so we come again to, here's another one of me actually facilitating one of the survivor groups on a lesson. And my question to all of us is, how do we work at the hyphens of multiple identities and communities as an insider researcher? So I was the researcher, I was the designer of the curriculum, and I also delivered some of the intervention as well. Okay, so just wanted to share with you some of the pictures from the women who were in our last group. This is a quote from one of them. Collectively, we knew that we are not alone in our suffering, but that we were one in mind, in body, in spirit, and ancestral blood. This is the carving of the bamboo stands and then stamping for a cake that they would get at the closing ceremony. The closing ceremony, for those who know Oahu, is at Ku'ukaniloko, which is considered the pico, or the belly button, the center of the island, and was the birthplace of Hawaiian royalty. This is a birthing rock. One of the participants in our program, just to let you know, all these, every participant agreed for their images to be used. So this is one of our elders who was actually in the support group, and she was 78 years old. And some of the women chanting their genealogies. Now remember, I just want to say, we are so colonized that I would say 99% of people in this group had never learned Hawaiian, never learned any of these chants. Most of them don't even know anything about the genealogy besides their parents, and some of them don't even know their parents. So it was a very moving experience for them. And again, another quote, it's empowering to see the relevance of each level of those sayings that was coincided with the topic. I will continue to read from those sheets when I feel unbalanced. So, just as we come to the end, and again, this is really too much to go into, but I just wanted to share that part of what we did was to kind of look at how you think about how the Western interventions around domestic sexual violence and child abuse are designed. And what we try to do is to kind of to look at what it is that we're doing differently. Like, so, for example, one of the things that I think is really important is that for those who have harmed their partners. Okay. So you see the second one, accountable to the state. So what I say is, don't be accountable to the probation officer, the cop who arrested you, to the judge. Be accountable to your ancestors. And so when you say to the men, when you were in the privacy of that bedroom, raping your wife, imagine that your ancestors were watching you, and they saw what you did. And as I'm sure all of you are probably feeling this moment, I would say half the men start crying, and the other half put their heads down. And these are guys who say, I don't even know I'm in these groups. But when you say, you are not accountable to the judge, you're accountable to your ancestors. They are with you every day, and they saw what you did. Then this idea of who you are as a person, and what it is that will be the pathway to your healing, takes on a whole different approach than if you say, if you do this again, you're going to jail, you know. If you violate the restraining order, you will get sent to jail. And guess what they do? They violate the restraining order, right? So this idea of who it is that we are accountable to is part of this different way of knowing, right? You're not accountable only to yourself, you're accountable to your community, right? Your parents, your soccer coach, your son's daycare teacher. You're accountable to all those people, not just your partner, to all these people, your teachers, right? So in terms of replication, here are some of the things we say are universal approaches. The power of culture in the process of change and healing. The beliefs in redemption and forgiveness, accountability and reflection as part of the healing process. The emphasis on community, not on the self. Valuing our local and indigenous ways, and not only the Western ways. I didn't say instead of, right, but not only. The interconnectedness across levels, dimensions, space, and time. Intersectionality, acknowledging the relationship between all forms of oppression. And acknowledging trauma as a core aspect of violence and a core aspect of oppression, colonization. Inequality, I call that word government. And always remembering and acknowledging our resilience, our courage, our survival, our transformation, our healing, our renewal. They're all the things that have kept us all alive to this point. There's testimony in that, you know, and we draw on those things instead of drawing on all the negativity. So I had posed two questions, right? What loyalties are more prominent than others as insider researchers, those who work with our people and researchers? And how do we integrate our academic training with our whole selves? All that we are, and being an academic and being a researcher is only one little part of who we are, right? And then finally, we close every group. The men close with the saying, "Namele Mao Amao," my stories and my work go on forever. And the reason we say that is because a lot of times in the other groups they're told, now you're at the end of the group, you've graduated on. And what we say is, you finish this group, but now the next part of the hardest part of your life goes on from here, which is the application that you've known and learned for the rest of your life. And then for the women say, which is, I am a woman of superior strength. We close every group with women holding hands and saying that. I'm done. Thank you.
Questions? We'll take 3 or 4. Thank you for giving your opportunity for your
Oh no, glad he or she were here.
I really appreciate your work. My name is Charlene. My dad's name is Opsec, and I'm very from Alaska and stuff. And I'm working on my master's right now through the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And it's a parallel to your work where I'm also trying to use cultural values in eliminating and responding to violence. So I really appreciate your talking to me. I guess my question is, and I'm sure it's hard, the men and the women's groups are separate. And I was wondering how you could talk about your experience with facilitating as a woman working with men, how that is. That's something that I've come across I think is challenging. And my other question is, you mentioned at the beginning being an Indigenous researcher is very personal to me. There's a lot of tension. Can you speak a little bit about your journey and where you feel you're at today, having that one little role and being an Indigenous researcher is really hard. I guess that's I mean, that's we can talk now, I guess.
Yeah, we can talk after. Thank you very much. So I'll just say a couple things. You know, I think that the first one, which is about the sexual gender of the facilitator,
you know, there's so much more to know and to learn about that. What I would say is, I think being old compared to the participants, I think that's the thing that trumped it. More than being a woman, it was the fact that I was older. And I'll tell you a very fast story, but there was, and it was really about me, about my own insecurity, about how much I understood my own culture, because I did not grow up in a cultural way myself, but I learned a lot just from this process. This is the thing again, right? I probably learned as much as the participants did from my own preparation for doing this, right? And so there was this, I was insecure really about being a facilitator. And this, I felt a little bit like a charlatan, you know, teaching on culture when like I didn't grow up with culture. And I would let the guys get away with all kind of crap because I was insecure, right? And so finally there was this one young man who was like, he wouldn't take his hat off and he was always like looking down and not doing his whatever. So I finally, you know, called him after class and talked to him and I said, you know, I don't know what to do about this. I said, but you're clearly having a hard time in the group and you're making a hard time for me. And I'm here to help all of you, and if this is something that is not for you, it's really okay. But I need you to help me. Now, so two things happened. I'm about to cry right now. But I started crying because I was so frustrated and I felt so bad that he was, and you know what it was? He was so disrespectful of me as a facilitator. Now, I've done a lot of men's groups. Why would I cry if they're disrespectful of me? That's how they are. But when this young man was this way, I was thinking, like, you're a young man, like, he was like 24. He had many offenses, right? And then all of a sudden this thing came to me, I'm sure through my ancestors, and I said to him, I am your elder. And I said, you cannot treat me this way. I'm not the facilitator of this group. I'm your elder. And this is not how you're supposed to behave with elders. And he was like, oh, huff, puff, whatever. And then he left, and then he came back the next week, and we were about to kick him out, actually, of the group. We were about to call the probation officer, and he came back, and he apologized to me. And he said, I'm really sorry that I disrespected you, and I know that that wasn't right how I was acting. And then he proceeded to be like the star of the class. The star. I mean, and it was really because I met him at that level of culture, right? I didn't say I'm a facilitator and I'm calling it PO tomorrow, which I would have actually in the past, but I didn't, right? And I think I was so hurt personally as a Hawaiian that this young man would treat me this way. I think I couldn't even believe I started crying. But I think that touched him in a way. And he was like the star people. He was like telling all the older guys what to do when they're misbehaving. It was pretty moving. So I think, you know, understanding your statuses is part of doing, I think, good work, including as a researcher. So I would say, you know, a status as a researcher, like I always say, like, I was a lot of things and still am before I got my PhD, and my life will go on long after I don't care if I have a PhD. And so I think we just have to situate and contextualize our academic and research training within the wholeness of our lives. It doesn't mean to degrade it, it doesn't mean to devalue it. I worked hard for my PhD, and I get a lot of status out of it. But at the end of the day, nobody really cares if I have a PhD in my community. Most of them don't even know, and I don't think they really care, right? But what I want them to remember is that I treated them well and with respect. And if they think it's because I have a PhD, fine, but I kind of don't care. You know, what's most important is I treated them as I should have treated them in the research endeavor. So.
Hi, Kalei.
Hey.
I wanted you to talk a little bit more. Thank you so much. Oh, thanks, Chris. I like a lot of this. Okay. I wanted you to talk a little bit about how you work with your own stuff within facilitating the group, and how you also supported your staff in being able to be reflexive and take care of themselves in facilitating, and like knowing how that was getting implicated in the work.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is in terms of the staff. I just want to tell you this really funny story about our first Kanuha research project. Now, it was 6 years in the CBC, so it was over $2 million. It was a lot of money they gave us. But and again, I was working with a community-based organization. I would say none of the facilitators had gone to college. Many of them were survivors. And many of them had been working in domestic violence at least 10 to 15 years, doing groups. And we had seen hundreds more people than I have ever seen in service delivery. But they'd never worked on a research project, and been part of a research project, this organization. It's like just like grassroots, funky dumb, right? And so I was teaching some things. So we used a quasi-experimental design, randomly assigning Hawaiians who came in to either the Hawaiian-only intervention or to the, and then 3 conditions: Hawaiian-only intervention, Hawaiians only in a Hawaiian intervention, Hawaiians only in a Western intervention, and business as usual, the mixed ethnicity, like what they've been doing for 20 years. So I said to them, look, if we're going to show this thing works, you really have to like not try to do something different in the groups that you're doing. So we talked about this whole thing, you know, and so then this became the mantra, contamination. It became a big joke. Like, you know, they would go around saying, contamination. Don't be telling people about what we're doing in that group. It was so fantastic. So I taught the facilitators some of this language and research, and I said, we want to do the best job we can, and that means don't try harder or less hard in the intervention. Know the intervention really well if you're going to do it. And if you're not doing the intervention, the experimental treatment that you're doing in business as usual, do it the best that you can. At least for the next 2 years, do it the best that you can, because we're trying to show that this thing really works. So there's kind of mini researchy lessons where it was part of it. And so part of that, taking care of yourself as a facilitator, was we want to do the best we can because we have this $2 million research project. So it was this buy-in kind of thing. So I did a lot of rah-rah, and it's so great, it's the only place, the only intervention like this in the entire country, if not the world, never been done in Hawaii. We're going to really show that it works. I mean, so there's a lot of this rah-rah, right? So I said, and at the end, if it doesn't work, we know that we did it the best way possible, right? But that contamination, I mean, every time I see their words, I'm like, contamination, don't talk to that guy, don't do that. Don't tell him that that guy's in that other group. It was just terrific. They were just really, we loved the project, you know? So that was one thing. I think the other thing is there's a lot of debriefing that we would do, right? So like after that time with that young man, I basically like cried with the facility. I kind of wish I had stopped the group before that. It was on a break. We had a whole other hour to go. But so we would get together and debrief, right? So, but the debriefing was as much on the research part of it as it was on what exactly happened in the group. Does this fit with the intervention? And so we did a lot of talking, right? Yeah. So I mean, I think that's only, but it had to be built in, right? The built-in debriefing about the intervention delivery as well as the research part.
You guys can enter our conversation.
Yes. Right into the mic.
So would like to thank Kalei for being here and doing the conversation. I think it's really important that we close this out in a way that we all acknowledge that we're okay and that we're safe and that whatever vibrated through us with our ancestors and ourselves and our own experience, that we are able to walk out here feeling like we did some work together and now we can move. And I hold space. I don't sing or chant or have an offering, and I'm now opening the floor up for somebody to help us close this circle and this conversation, and it's open to anybody in the room. So please help us out and help out our community and assist with this process. Please.
Pick a song, poem,
Words. Then we'll stay here till we're done. Is it okay for just a private reflection then, and being able to close that out? Does that feel good? A moment of self-care? Let's do that. Shake your shoulders. Loosen up. thank you for joining us today. And on behalf of Erie and the ancestors, the teachers, and those that have participated in the work that you do, and those that will change their ways, we want to thank you for being with us today.